Recording in progress.
Okay, well, welcome to this afternoon's wonderful proceedings, which you know why we're here, and this is Scott Oshiro's dissertation defense. I'm Chris Chafe, and been working with Scott for the duration, but also prior to that, and I'm joined by Scott's dissertation committee, which you have Julia Smith, Marina Bossi, Aviad Rubenstein, thank you, who's our external member from computer science, Patricia Alessandrini, who's joining us from New York via Zoom, and I think that's the group. Yeah. So it's kind of my pleasure to be able to introduce Scott a little bit ahead of time. And for those of you who know me too well, you know that email is my memory. I don't have another source of memory anymore. And I sometimes take moments like this to go back, a few folders and see what transpired. And if I go back 7 years, it's a really wonderful moment to see how our friendship kind of immediately bloomed 7 years ago in the context of music improvisation, and Scott being in Washington, D.C. at the time, I was here, and Scott was an adept at doing online network performance and already an accomplished improviser. Well, it was one of those kind of moments where you just say to yourself, that sounded really good. What do we do next? And that was, as I said, 7 years ago. And I started to find out, that this is a gentleman of extraordinary curiosity. Curious about network music performance, but that was just a stepping stone once he got to Stanford. And as you're going to see today, it's all very consistent. There was the stepping stone which came from Scott's world of music, but boy, he turned to another spot, which we're going to hear about, and he taught all of us here in the lab about quantum computing and music in a way that I think, most of us didn't even put the two thoughts together at that point. But the other side of Scott is this teaching that he does, and it comes naturally. It's a gift that he has that I knew from the get-go when you joined us at a workshop in Riverside. Yeah, before I guess you knew you were coming here, but you came to help out this workshop for the NowNet Arts conference 6 years ago. And it was that sort of patient leading someone to a place that they wanted to go that I saw over and over again in that workshop. I felt the same thing when we got halfway through this dissertation project, and it was time for me to write an exam for him. Ha! So we had a really wonderful summer, a couple summers back, where Scott gave me weekly lessons on bringing me up to speed, and I think others of you benefited from this as well. So, the email, when I go back, there's these traces of things that, I would recount. In fact, I'll warn people who are sending me emails right now, it might be something that I should give some sort of warning about, that, what you say in your email may be used in a dissertation defense introduction, sometime, 5 years or 6 years from now. But it's also music, and I'm gonna play a clip, if you'll indulge me, that shows this side of Scott in performance. And it's from 3 years ago, and lots of emails kind of centered right around then. We were 3 months into the lockdowns, and there's this beautiful duo with Dr. Emily Graber playing on violin and Scott on flute. Everybody in their respective studio, bedroom, wherever. I think Emily was in the Midwest somewhere. You were in EV, and the rest of us, the audience was anywhere at that point. So let's see, here we go. I'll have to crane my neck to get us going. Now, watch his eyes. I don't want to put you on the spot, but this music is being invented on the fly, and his eyes are looking where he's going next and searching possibilities. And I think it's so relevant. You know, you can see it just in the gaze, and it relates to what he's going to be talking about today. So this goes on for an hour, so we should leave it there. And good luck. Looking forward to this.
Check, check. Hello. Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Chris. That was amazing. Thank you. And I guess we can go over to the slides. So, hi everybody, my name is Scott Oshiro. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a flautist, composer, and music technology researcher. And today I'll be talking about my research I've been conducting over the last four to 5 years. And it's called Lineage and Freedom, a framework for quantum improvisation. And before I kind of get into the nitty gritty, I kind of want to, for those of you who don't know me very well, to kind of give a little bit about myself as it pertains and it gives you context for where my research is going to be going. So I'm based in the Bay Area, but I'm originally from the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, as Chris said. I actually went to George Mason University for undergraduate, and I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering and a concentration in computer engineering in 2014. After that, I went directly into network engineering consulting firms to work professionally, and to say the least, I hated that job. And what I wanted to do was actually get into music. I wanted to be a musician, and so I practiced daily. I was going to different gigs, I was going to different jam sessions, learning from the community in the DMV area. And actually, for me, going into graduate school, or nonetheless the PhD program, was out of the question for me. I never even thought that was possible for me, until I came across the work of Dr. Stefan Alexander, who's a physicist and jazz saxophonist. And that kind of gave me the inspiration to kind of start thinking about maybe I should go into a graduate program for music.
I find that both conceptually and in terms of style, that there are lots of interesting parallels between jazz improvisation and how theoretical physicists, which is what I do for a living, how we actually come up with new ideas, come up with new physics. The one connection is the mysterious way that quantum particles actually move. A quantum particle actually, according to the rules of quantum mechanics, as it moves from point A to point B, will actually traverse all possible paths. When you think about this particle as an improvisation, as the way a jazz soloist might actually improvise from a starting note to a finishing note, the jazz musician, a very skilled one, will consider many possible notes that could be compatible with the melodic line, similar to how a quantum particle will consider all these possible paths from point A to point B. There are times when I'm playing and I'm improvising that I might actually, as a device, as an improvisational device, I might think about a physics idea, because what that will do is it will get me from thinking to intellectually about what notes I'm playing. Because the name of the game, as Charlie Parker says, is to practice, but when you're up there playing, throw it all away.
So in 2016, Dr. Alexander released a book called The Jazz of Physics, and it compared the properties of quantum mechanics and cosmology with the properties of jazz improvisation. And for me, reading through this book was just groundbreaking for me to kind of think about jazz improvisation in this sort of quantum mechanical lens. So one of the main points that I took away from the book that kind of is the foundation for what I'm going to be talking about today is that exactly what he talked about in the video we just saw. So on the left side of the graph, we see a classical particle, and it wants to move from point A to point B. In a classical sense, that path from point A to point B, there's one path to get there, one single straight line. For a quantum particle, however, to get from point A to point B, there are many different paths, even infinite amounts of paths that are traversed by the particle simultaneously. So he makes an analogy, and he brings up 2 bars of a transcribed soul from Sonny Rollins. So if we can think about the first and the last note, and for those of you who don't read music, first note here, it's a D, last note here is a G. And in a classical sense, and if you want to even make the analogy between classical music and jazz music, there's one path to get from D to G. However, when Sonny Rollins is actually improvising in the moment, when he gets to the starting note of D, he actually has many, many different possible paths he can choose from, and they all exist at the same time. And when he goes from note to note to note as they manifest, they begin to collapse down to the melodic pattern that we actually hear in the audience. So this one, we actually see that was written down. The other work that was very inspirational to me during my time when I was working, and I was thinking about going into a PhD program, was the work of George Lewis and Steve Coleman, who developed a program called Ramses, and George Lewis developed a program called Voyager, which were real-time computer improvisation systems, where real human musicians could improvise with these computer systems in real time, and they would react to what the musicians are playing. Now, when I started off, when I met Chris and I actually got into Stanford and I started off in my program at CCRMA, I actually didn't start off going in this direction of my research. I actually started off doing network music performance for about a year. And then the summer following my first year, I actually read an article called Stanford Physicists Count Sound Particles with Quantum Microphone. And what they were saying was researchers at Stanford were able to record the sound of a qubit going into superposition. Don't ask me how it works, I have no idea. This is from the physics department. And from there, I just became so inspired to see that there was a connection between acoustics, music, and the quantum world. So I kind of did some digging, and at the time I had no idea what a qubit was. And I did some research, and I figured out a qubit was something that was used in quantum computation, in quantum computers. So before I go any further, I need to go over what the concept of a quantum computer is and what exactly a quantum computer is. So back in the 1980s, a physicist named Richard Feynman did a series of lectures at MIT where he proposed the concept of being able to simulate quantum phenomena using quantum phenomena in a device, hence a quantum computer. At the time, that was very abstract, it's very theoretical, and it's been that way for many decades. Until recently, in recent years, we've had companies such as IBM, Google, Microsoft, and so many startups are starting to pop up now that actually are being able to develop these real quantum computers. And companies such as IBM, they actually give access to the public for free use of using these quantum computers and to experiment with them as well. So what exactly is a quantum computer? So quantum computing is a new medium of computation that uses the properties and laws of quantum mechanics. The fundamental building blocks of a classical computer, if we want to do a comparison, is a classical bit. And a classical bit is a bit of information that holds either a 0 or, and that's very important, or a 1. Now for a quantum computer, the fundamental building block is a qubit or a quantum bit. And what it is, it holds either a 0 or a 1 or 1 and 0 at the same time. They're both states at the same time. And quantum computing takes advantage of 3 main properties. One is superposition, which I just explained of being 2 states at once, 0 and 1 at the same time. And then we also have this property of entanglement, where we can take the qubits, prepare them and take 2 qubits, multiple qubits, put them in a specific state where they share a specific state. And if you change the state of one qubit, the other qubit changes simultaneously. And this doesn't matter how far apart or close together they are. This is what Einstein coined the term spooky at a distance, spooky interaction at a distance. And the last property of quantum computing is the use of this interference. So the qubit states actually can interfere constructively and destructively with one another to cancel out certain possibilities and amplify certain possibilities of being seen. Now, I would like to note, and I always kind of forget this when I talk about qubits, because it's very intuitive for me, but when the qubit is in a state of superposition between 0 and 1, is 1 and 0 at the same time, it's in that state as long as you don't look at it or you don't measure it. The second you look at it, you measure it, it collapses down to a classical bit. It's either 1 or 0. So these are what we call a superconducting qubit quantum computer looks like. So in IBM, and for the purposes of this talk, we'll just strictly stay with superconducting quantum computers because there's many different types and many different flavors. But for superconducting quantum computers, they need to be very, very, very cold, so close to 0 Kelvin. So what we see on the left side here is what's called a dilution refrigerator that keeps everything very, very cold. And inside that dilution refrigerator, we have the actual quantum computer, which is this big golden chandelier. And at the very bottom, at the very tip of the quantum computer, is where the quantum processor with the qubits actually lie. So people are able to access them over the internet. You can build your quantum algorithms and then send your algorithm to be executed on the quantum computer over the internet. So you send it to IBM, and then they do the experiment for you, and they send it back to you to do whatever you need to do in your application. So when we're developing quantum algorithms, we think of it in terms of quantum circuits. And they're similar to digital logic circuits, but they operate pretty differently. So what we see on the right side, and don't pay attention to the left side at this moment, this will come into a later slide, but these are what quantum circuits look like. And so we see these horizontal lines with a Q at the end, and that represents different qubits within the quantum processor. Now, the squares that we see with the H's and the X's and the Z's, the different letters and the different connecting of the different qubits, we call those quantum gates, which actually manipulate the superposition states of those qubits together and have them interact with one another. And at the very end, we see this meter kind of gate here. And all that is we're saying we're looking at the qubit. We're measuring the state of the qubit and saying, okay, what did we see when we looked at it? Was it a 0 or was it a 1? And we have to do this many, many, many times on the order of like 1,000 experiments to be able to get a distribution of what that quantum state actually is doing. So I've said a lot about, and I've only kind of touched the surface of what quantum computing is and why people are excited about quantum computing. But one of the main questions I get is, okay, you're doing quantum computing, what does that have to do with music at all? So just like the digital computer, as it evolved over time, computer music also evolved with it. So just with the emergence of quantum computers, we also see an emergence of another subfield called quantum computer music. And this is mostly spearheaded by a professor named Eduardo Miranda, which I have the pleasure of to work with for over the past couple of years. But we have been developing, and his group has been developing quantum algorithms for sound synthesis, for melody generation, all the way to using it for Markov chains, and all the way down to cellular automata. And then he's also kind of proposed a way to use quantum algorithms and use quantum computers to be able to make it more efficient to control digital instruments using brainwaves. Another part of the field is was spearheaded by my good friend, Dr. Omar Costa-Harmido, who actually did a dissertation, one of the first dissertations on quantum computer music when he graduated from the University of California, Irvine in 2021. But what he researched was how to integrate quantum computing algorithms and different quantum computing capabilities into our current computer music frameworks, such as Max MSP, and he was able to develop different quantum synthesizers, and so on and so forth, and different plugins for Ableton Live. And I encourage you to read his dissertation. And then we've also worked on in 2020, and we're able to present it at the NowNet conference in 2020, different ways we can use quantum network communication protocols to kind of see how we can use those capabilities in a network music performance, so kind of performing over the internet. And this is a very involved project. We actually proposed it in the paper, and then we're now continuing to build out the actual architecture, and it's an ongoing project. But right now we're dealing with a simulated quantum internet, and eventually we want to kind of propose it to different labs and kind of see if we can do it on a real quantum network. And the last thing I'll kind of mention, since there's many different branches of where I can go with going over the field of this, is the development of quantum algorithms for either image processing and audio signal processing as well. So the main goal of quantum computing is that it promises an exponential speed up over our classical machines, so our everyday laptops, desktops, our phones, our iPads. But for music, the way that Dr. Miranda and many other researchers have kind of approached it was we're looking for different capabilities to take advantage of, not necessarily an exponential speed up over our devices, but since these are fundamentally different, what capabilities can we take advantage of and what things have we not even considered? So the process has been to take what are existing computer music algorithms and then kind of convert them to quantum computer music algorithms. But for me, I kind of kept thinking back at Dr. Alexander's work and George Lewis's work, and I wanted to combine the two into building an improvisation system using a quantum computer. So in general, I wanted to play with a quantum computer. So for my dissertation work, I came up with something called a quantum framework for improvisation. And I'll read a little bit of this, but musical improvisation is aligned with the properties of quantum computers, which include superposition, entanglement, and interference. And these properties allow us to simultaneously consider infinite possible musical patterns, harmonies, rhythms, decisions, and musical interactions. And from this, I built this framework based off of my experiences and the way I was taught in music for improvisation and jazz. And I kind of used that as the basis, and with also some existing frameworks for building out this quantum framework. So when building out this framework, I started with the conditions of improvisation, 4 fundamental characteristics from George Lewis. So what he states is that number 1, we are all agents, and number 2, we're all in a state of indeterminacy. So we don't know when we first start out, when we improvise with one another, we don't know where the music's gonna go. We have to communicate with one another and to be able to see how we want to proceed as a group. And then we analyze our environment as the music goes on to look for clues and things of how we can predict what's going to happen. And then we kind of make a decision of what we want to play. So the first thing I did, and this has been a big thing in quantum physics, is to make an analogy between classical physics and then kind of pull it into quantum physics. So I did the same thing. I kind of said, okay, from these characteristics, what are these shared properties with quantum mechanics? So the first one, indeterminacy, I said, okay, that sounds to me like superposition. And then if we're indeterminate and we're kind of looking for clues and we're kind of changing what our decisions are going to be before we make them, this is time evolution of the superposition state that we prepared. And then when we make a choice, and that one was easy, is this a measurement? So we go from superposition to time evolution to making a measurement. And then from there, as I spent my time here doing research, developing different applications for quantum computer music generation systems, I was able to build out quantum perspectives of conditions of improvisation. So first one, I state that entanglement can be used as a form of musical communication between different musical agents. External and internal musical elements and processes are interacting quantum states. And then also rhythmic and tonal content are entangled quantum states. And then also we need to consider the time evolution of these interacting states, external and internal. And then also the very bottom of it is something we all can't avoid because quantum computers are not perfect and they're not practical at the moment, is that noise is a characteristic of the system. So this last one, I don't have a specific application that demonstrates this, but you will see this evident in the other applications that I present. So first we're gonna start with entanglement as a form of musical communication between different musical agents. So I start my quantum journey diving into something which I call quantum beat generation, which is I wanted to build quantum computing applications that could generate a beat for me or different rhythms for me. So in December 2019, I had the privilege of participating in South Africa in a hackathon that IBM put on for different universities, for students, undergraduate, graduate, and professionals from different universities in Africa to come to South Africa, Johannesburg, and participate in this hackathon that allowed them to get into teams, and we compete against one another to build a quantum computing application within 24 hours. And then this is a picture of my team. On the left is my coach from IBM, Lauren. And then at the time, who's on my direct right is actually Omar. He was actually a coach because he's a Kids Kid advocate. And then on the far right is Tushbeng, who was my teammate for this hackathon. So what we ended up coming up with in 24 hours was this idea of qubits. And what we did was we said, okay, we encoded multiple beats onto different qubits, and then we used existing quantum circuits, such as the Bell state, which just entangles two qubits together, and then we also did it with a teleportation algorithm that's used for quantum network communication. So what you're gonna see here is when we actually run the experiments on these different circuits with these beats encoded onto the qubits, we get different variations and rhythms from that result from these different circuits. So I'm gonna play a demo for you. It's a very simple application. So the first set of beat rhythms are gonna repeat 3 times, and that's the original rhythm. The second one is from the Bell state here, and then the third one here is from the teleportation circuit. Oh. So that was the original. And that was a bell. And then that was a teleportation circuit. So it was able to give us different variations of the original rhythms that came out. So that was a very simple application to get us acquainted with quantum computing. But when I came back, I actually took Dr. Rubenstein's class, I think it was CS 259Q, in Introduction to Quantum Algorithms. And I actually did, it was actually a very hard class, by the way. But I did my final project on another beat application that I will explain in the next section called Quico, and this was like the first iteration of it. And the next section is, I have a final version of it. And then I also, when the pandemic hit, the hackathons actually didn't slow down, they just put them online. So in 2020, I was able to participate in a Qiskit Global Hackathon. That one, I didn't do any music, I just did a quantum chemistry application with a group of other people from different universities from around the world. But in 2020, Yale and Stanford hosted something called QC Hack, which was the first time it was actually held in 2021. And they invited a whole bunch of different companies that were in quantum computing, and they presented us with different challenges. And my team actually won first place for the IBM Technical Challenge, and I was proud of that one because I came up with the idea and actually kind of built it myself. But what we came up with was a system for improving quantum audio signal processing algorithms using higher order states. That sounds like a lot, but I do have some appendix slides if you're interested in hearing about it. But since my team won that hackathon, we were able to be invited as mentors to participate as mentors for students at the NYU Abu Dhabi Hackathon for social good, focusing on quantum computing. And here, this is just some pictures of my friends and my team that I mentored here. And then there, I was able to meet up with Paul Miller, or AKA DJ Spooky, who was doing the keynote speech on quantum computing and music. And I showed him an updated version of Qbeats that I did. And he allowed me to present at a piece of it at the keynote speech. But what we did was, and I probably have to click here. I updated it so that I would take the 2 different rhythms, I would segment them out, and then for each segment, I would convert them into a quantum state on a set of qubits. And then from there, I would take those qubits, those states on those qubits, and then I would just entangle them. So that's what these quantum gates are doing. They're entangling the qubits from the 2 different beats together for each different time segment. And then from there, all this is saying is that whatever happens to collapse, what happens to be the state for this beat on this segment, please change the second beat accordingly. And then to get a call and effect kind of effect, I kind of did it one direction and I did it the other direction to kind of get like a conversation going back and forth. So here's an example of what that actually turned out to, these are the results of what actually came up from that application. So what you're gonna hear, and it's pretty easy to discern the different beats because they're using different drum kits, but you're gonna hear beat one play a specific rhythm, you're gonna hear beat two play a specific rhythm, then you're gonna hear them play together just to hear how they relate to one another. And then they're gonna go off and they're gonna improvise and they're gonna do a call and response. So that's beat one. And then that's beat two. And that's them playing together. And then they're gonna do a call and response. And then they play out together. So that was using entanglement as a form of musical communication. Next, I'm going to tackle 2 and 3 at the same time, as they're pretty closely related to each other. So in 2022, I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Eduardo Miranda, and I was able to publish Chapter 7 in the first ever quantum computer music book, Foundations, Methods, and Advanced Concepts. For this particular application, I did another version of the system that I did for CS259Q. And what this system did was, it's still within the lines of beat generation, but for a specific database of drum hit samples and melodic samples, can I come up with a quantum circuit that's able to rearrange these raw materials, these raw samples, into different beats, and actually not just one beat, but a collection of different beats with different flavors to them. So the architecture, and I won't go too deep into it because this is a whole presentation in itself, but we have a reference audio input that gives you a reference of how I kind of want to see the beats kind of unfold, like what kind of flavors do I want to have them be like? What is the influence that I want you to have when you're building these beats out? So it takes the input audio in, it filters out in the low pass, mid band, and high band, and then it takes some feature extraction. And then from the feature extraction, I'm taking mostly rhythmic and then harmonic content. And then I'm boiling it down to like specific metrics that I can use to encode onto 2 different quantum circuits that I evaluated. So one's called the static encoding method, one's called the PKBSE method, which I will show you in a second. But we then do an experiment where we run these circuits thousands of times, and then we get a probability distribution out. And then we compare it to the quantum states that are associated with each sample in the database. And then from there, there's a decoding sequence that's able to say, like, okay, here's beats that are more closely related to your audio input, and these are beats that are dissimilar from your audio input, and then everything in between. So this is the static encoding method, and again, I won't go too into the weeds, but all we want to leave from here is that this is a 6-qubit circuit, and I split it in half, and then I have a subdivision register which represents the beats, or the time information, the rhythmic information of what I want to do. So what beat do I want to encode certain parameters onto what I call the timbre register. So this is kind of the idea of what I mean by entangling rhythmic and tonal content together. However, and when we entangle these two together, this is saying for this, apply this, but also when I apply this, there's going to be some effect back on the rhythmic register as well. And that's called phase kickback, which I'll get into in the next slide. But this actually ended up being performed very, very well. But the issue was, because of these multi-controlled quantum circuits, they're very, very expensive. And then for each one, there's 3 of the different subbands that I have to apply for. So this is very, very expensive even to run on an actual quantum computer. So I developed another one, which is using the same idea of entangling rhythmic and tonal information together, but I was able to forego some of the accuracy in the tonal information, and then kind of was able to get a less expensive circuit. So there was a trade-off between either having to be too expensive or not performing not as well. And so this is showing you how we decode the probability distributions out and how to organize them into different beats. And then from there, in these tables of beats and sample combinations, we can now manually or even automatically from a different, whatever music application you want to use, to build out these different beats. So here are some of the initial examples I got from running these circuits. I'm not going to play you the actual input due to copyright issues. But so for example, here from the artist Her, from her track Feel Away for the first measure, this is some of the beats that came out of it. And then here's another one. Here's another one. Oh, and then from here, I'm going to skip this because this has some samples from the actual song in it. And then I also fed it a Giovanni Hidalgo conga solo, and this is what came out of this one for specific. So that was for the static encoding, and this is for the what I call the phase kickback sequencing encoding, or for short, the KBSE, which is the less expensive circuit that I showed. And I fed it in Miki Matsubara's Stay With Me Measure 16, and here's some of the examples that came out. Here's another one. And then I also have Miss Sego's Lavish Lullaby, which I'll play a little bit of that one. And then also this Giovanni Hidalgo solo again, and I'll just play the second one here. Now, these beats, if you like them or dislike them, that's all subjective, so I needed a kind of a way to analyze the performance of these systems. So I adapted a known metric for figuring out the flexibility of certain quantum circuits. So this metric is called expressibility. And I kind of adapted it to work with my audio database and randomized parameters for my audio samples. And what I came up with was these expressibility curves. So for a specific beat, we can see how flexible, how many variations can occur based off the input that we put into these circuits. So the higher the value that we see here, the less variations we're going to get. It's just going to give you one beat coming out, one pattern coming out. And then the lower the value, the more variations you're going to get out of it, the more times you measure the circuits. And then these were done on an actual simulator, which happens on your real computer, and also on a real device. And I think for the book chapter, it was run on IBM Q Montreal. And the book chapter in my dissertation will go into more detailed analysis, and because this is a little bit long to explain. So now comes my favorite part, and this is no less complicated, but time evolution of interacting external and internal musical states. So this is where we kind of get into where I want to actually build out a quantum music improvisation system, quantum computing improvisation system. So during, I think it was last summer, I became very interested in these particles, these quasi-particles called phonons. And what phonons are just quantum-sized particles of sound. And then I came across this IBM paper where they said they have simulated electron-phonon interactions using quantum computers. And they actually laid out the circuits that they use to simulate these different interactions. So I did a whole bunch of math, and I kind of tried to get my head around how they're doing all this stuff. But at the end of it, I was able to build out and kind of like adapt those circuits to build out a real-time improvisation system using electron-phonon interactions. And this is what it sounded like initially. noticed was that it started out in the very low register, and then it kind of just migrated its way to the very high register. And I noticed that it didn't have any constraints of where exactly it wanted to go itself. It just kind of floated off into nowhere. So at the beginning of this year, I kind of finished another version of this system, and I called it Lineage, a quantum improvisation system, because I call it Lineage because it's in line with, I guess, the lineage of building these computer improvisation systems with George Lewis and Steve Coleman. But I fleshed out the circuit a little bit more, and I actually took what I needed from the electron-phonon interactions, and I kind of put it into the context of how I improvise myself. So, and this is kind of like a high-level view of what is going on, and if you kind of dive deeper, it's kind of like they have the actual quantum circuits in there. But I have one quantum circuit that are interacting with each other, one for tonal gravity to give it context of where the melody needs to go and how it's supposed to respond to different human improvisers. And then we have an excitation state, which I use the electron phonon as kind of like an internal process for how it gets excited or doesn't get excited to specific audio coming in. And then I also have something called an external bound states and internal bound stage, and that this deals with mostly just the rhythm and is kind of mostly taken from the last section from Quico. And if you want to read a little bit more about the bound states, it's going to be in my dissertation. And then finally, I have this idea of microstructures, which I'll get to in a couple slides. So if we think about tonal gravity, what happens is if we have an audio signal come in, and we kind of slice up in different segments, and then we kind of say, okay, we have these pitches that are coming in. What's the probability that the system perceives one pitch over the other? So let's say, for example, we have like a reference pitch that the system's at the moment. And then this audio signal comes in, and it has the choice to either react to B, A, or E flat from what the human improviser has played. So depending on where it's being attracted to, it could either be attracted to A at a certain intensity, it could be attracted to B at a certain intensity, it could be deflected from A at a certain intensity, or it could be attracted to E flat at a certain intensity. So there's all these different probabilities, and if one occurs, it then goes that direction, and then has the same process over again, and then over again. And I call these microstructures because it kind of gives a skeleton of where the system kind of wants to go in relation to what's been played to it. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because this is just the quantum circuit that actually carries that out. And on the left side is something we called a inverse quantum Fourier transform, which flips the state of the qubit to kind of give you the energy within its phases. And that gives you these magnitudes, these intensities between how far it wants to pull or deflect from those different nodes. And then if you repeat them several times, just like here, that's what we call the time evolution. So we have different steps that we can cascade with one another, so they influence one another as they evolve through time. So that was the quantum tonal gravity section. And then for the excitation states, all I did was I took the energy circuit from the electron-phonon interaction, and I took the electron circuit, and I used it as a way to kind of dictate further the shape of that skeletal structure of the melody that's going to result. And this is just these are just results for different parameters I fed into the circuit to kind of see what I would expect, the expected value of the states that would be, depending on the signal input coming in from the human musician. And then this will be discussed way more in my written part of the dissertation as well. And then microstructures. So now we have the skeletal structure that has an idea of where it kind of wants to go. So I repurposed or kind of adapted a well-known algorithm called Grover's database search algorithm that uses the properties of interference for constructively and destructively canceling out or amplifying certain probabilities to have these different smaller movements in between the skeletal anchors that I've set up. So I said a lot of stuff, and that probably is kind of like a whole bunch of mush in your brains. It's kind of much in my brain at the moment too. But visually, all I'm saying is that let's say we have a system that's at a specific state and it has a reference pitch of, like, for simplicity, let's say middle C. And then I have a musician play with it, and it excites the system. If it excites the system, it says, okay, I have all these different possible paths I can take to get from point A to point B. And then as time goes on, I change those different probabilities in those different shapes and paths. And then when I go to measure it, I say, okay, this is one of them. This is kind of the idea I want to do. We do the same thing with the movements in between those different anchor points. And with those different movements, you can, there's 3 right now, but you can have many, many, many more. But then those also collapse into a specific path. So what my circuit does is literally this. And this was technically what Dr. Alexander was talking about at the beginning of the talk. So here's an example of what happened when I ran this circuit, and I actually used an input from one of the example inputs from La Brosa, which is just a jazz trumpet solo being played. And then from there, it generated 4,000 different melodic phrases, very one bar melodic phrases. And I kind of put them together in kind of a sequence to kind of show you what it would kind of came up with. So that's the input. Okay, I think that was the last one. So from there, the next step was to make this happen in real time. So that was this, I just fed it in the audio signal and it kind of just generated. So now I wanted to do this in real time. And for now, we're done with all the quantum circuits and everything. So now we're just gonna be listening to music, which is my favorite part. But I actually built out the architecture for the real-time system, which I have in the appendix if you also wanna see that as well. But I had Chris play with it down in the listening room. And this is what transpired. And forgive us chatting in the middle of it playing. We're kind of figuring out different things.
A lot of spatial stuff. Going around your head.
So that was one of the initial tests that me and Chris did together, and then I did another one just by myself. I kind of wanted to see what would happen if I gave it more activity to the system. recently, me and Omar usually have weekly meetings together, and we usually work on different projects. But recently, we've been working on building a electroacoustic duo together using our quantum computer applications. And this is just a preview. We call ourselves NPHD. It's kind of a play on words if you're in the quantum computer community. But yeah, so we're coming out with an EP later in the summer, probably hopefully at the end of this month. But this is just a clip of one of the songs that we played with the actual Lineage system. And instead of the brush bells, this time I kind of used it with a bass and a drummer. Oh. Venues to play while we're down there in New York. But so very shortly, I'll go over what I'm kind of going for in the future. So immediately, I'm working with a group from IBM, working on different things called sort of qubits and qdits, and using them to simulate different circuits in Qiskit. And from there, I kind of want to help build this out, since I kind of want to explore higher orders from beyond just 0, 1, and 2. 0, 1, I want to kind of go beyond and see if like I can create superpositions between 1 and 2, or 2 and 0, and then 3 if it even gets there. But so I kind of am working with them in developing a simulator for that within their framework. And then also for modeling musical interactions, everything that I've generated here, I kind of want to go back and actually kind of say, like, how can we mathematically model some of these interactions? And since a lot of this stuff is coming from electron-phonon particle interactions, they have mathematics associated with them. And then those mathematics can be translated using certain mathematical techniques to be translated onto quantum circuits. So that way, possibly, if I can build a system and then reverse engineer it, I can come up with the mathematical descriptions of different musical interactions. And it kind of gives us a window into improvisation that we kind of never had before. And then also from here, as I develop these systems, I kind of want to, these are just based off of my personal experiences. In terms of jazz and jazz education, it hasn't, there's been a diversity problem, and it's been taken from the communities that have developed jazz in the first place. So what I kind of want to do and kind of use my position as is to kind of go back to these communities and these musicians and say, like, well, how do you improvise? What is your approaches? And then kind of use that as a communal kind of research for going forward, because in this current climate of AI and everything, these kind of systems kind of, quite frankly, just rob from different musical communities. So I kind of want to change from just dealing with the technical side of things and kind of use this research to go into another project I'm trying to get funding for decolonization of Black creative improvised music through an Afrofuturistic lens. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to do with this dissertation research afterwards. And then I would like to give my thanks to mostly my partner, my girlfriend, Tanya. If it wasn't for her, I don't know how I would get through any of this. So thank you so much, and I love you. And then I would like to thank my mom, my dad, my brother Alex, my sister Mia, and then to all my extended family out in the Bay, out in Oregon. And then I would like to thank all my friends, Sergio, Daniel, Katie, Maida, my good friend Omar, Ethan from UC Riverside, and to all my friends that have supported me through this time. I would like to thank my committee, Chris Chafe. It's just been amazing. And thank you so much for all the opportunities and everything. And then thank you so much, Marina and Julius and Patricia. And then I would also like to thank Takako, who's not here today, but she acted as my replacement advisor while Chris was on sabbatical my second year, and she gave me so much support for that. And then also for Dr. Rubenstein for doing the quantum computing class. I've learned so much. And then I would also like to thank everybody involved with the Asian improv arts. So especially for Francis and Wesley Uwenton, who's helped me kind of get reconnected with my Okinawan roots. And then even just kind of kept my music alive as I kind of went through my research and my time here. And then to all my music teachers, Paul Carr, Dave Valentine, Pepe Gonzalez, there's so many more. And then to all the people that supported me at IBM, Ruth Marinshaw, who helped me get the quantum access in the engineering department, and then Dr. Miranda and then his group at Plymouth University, Quantum Coalition, all the people I've met in all the different hackathons in NYU Abu Dhabi, and also everybody at Black Voice Code, and then just everybody who has supported me throughout the years. And that's all, folks. Thank you.
Wow. Congratulations.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank
so we have time for some questions from the folks assembled, and take as long as we need, and including those who are online. I guess this is a good moment to also recognize the contribution of Constantine, who's been extraordinary with us. Yeah. Well, even that quarantine session that sounded so well because of him, and he was playing, you just didn't hear it at that moment in the concert. But all through. So if there are any questions there, you can field them, I guess. Thanks. Yeah. But please feel free.
Are you taking comments?
Yes, and maybe we'll do the pass the mic thing so the online folks can hear it. Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. It's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Really cool work. A lot of interesting potential for improvisation practices. I'm not sure if I'm interested in what it means for improvisation as a practice, sort of to socially. Would you be interested in these kinds of tools supplementing an individual's improvisational practice such that they can play on their own? Would it encourage or discourage community building around improvisation?
Oh, sorry, keep going.
And it's funny because I actually think I had a totally separate question, but maybe you can address that first.
Oh yeah, so the idea of kind of going through building all these different improvisation systems, especially through a quantum mechanical lens, is that I don't necessarily want to replace human musicians. I kind of take on the same philosophy as George Lewis, which is kind of like saying, if through the practice of building these different improvisation systems, we learn more about ourselves. We learn about, we think about how we're improvising, we're more intentional about how we're improvising. And then from there, we kind of say oh, maybe there's different ways to expand the way we kind of look at it in terms of things. So it's not necessarily like an AI system that's coming to replace human musicians. It's more like I'm encoding or kind of transferring my essence into another entity that kind of can show me things about myself that I couldn't see before. So, yeah.
And I'm curious also about the decisions that you make that are in the kind of quantum algorithms that end up making these improvisational tools are sort of, in some sense, your perspective on improvisation and the bases of them, and like the deflecting off notes versus not. And I was curious in the flute. I guess in Chris's improv and your improv with that system that you showed. There was a lot of, the tool spat out a lot of very kind of fast passages and stuff. I'm curious, what was the sequencing of time for that, or how did that happen?
So that's actually kind of a little bit of a bug I need to fix. So it's trying to track tempo at the same time, and it's kind of trying to slow down and speed up with the musician. But that's actually done classically. I didn't have enough space actually in the computers to actually implement that circuit. But in a sense of implementing that time, time scales and tempo like that, I would kind of want to make that also quantum mechanical, since that's like I can make a decision to speed up with you, or I can just go the opposite direction and slow down, or do whatever
I was curious if like an option to choose silence would be maybe.
Yeah, that's another thing I have to think about as well. But yeah.
But anyways, yeah, thanks so much. It's awesome.
Are questions being taken from online?
From Jim Gates, if you'd like to unmute and ask a question.
Thank you so much. First of all, Scott, there's an echo, unfortunately. First of all, Scott, I want to congratulate you. I appreciated your email message alerting me to this presentation, and I've been busy emailing Stefan Alexander throughout the entire time. I have put a message in the chat box of someone that you don't know, but who would be amazingly congratulatory if he was alive to see this, and that's Professor Abdus Salam. He was a Nobel laureate in physics, and he recognized that when diverse people enter in interacting with physics, something amazing would happen. And in fact, you've mentioned that you read Stefan's book, The Jazz of Physics. So this quote is actually in that book. But you have realized what he said, and I congratulate you. I sent a message to your mother saying you're headed to great fame and fortune. You're a fantastic young man. And it was just amazing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's an honor. Thank you.
And also from Patricia.
So of course, Scott, I also want to congratulate you on this work, which is just so exciting, and some of the music just so compelling. I have to say I would have been proud myself to have composed that harp piece. I really liked it, and just the qualities that come out. You're really it's just such a fertile area and so exciting. I think Mike's comments are really interesting about phrasing. And I was wondering if you want to talk just a little bit about this project that you have of going into more communities and working with more musicians. Could you talk a little bit about how that process might work? And especially, I loved what you said, bring in what George Lewis talks about, how we learn more about human improvisation from AI-driven improvisation. So, what would that investigation look like? Is it partly looking in neuroscience at the same time? Is it looking experientially of what's happening with musicians playing with the system? Maybe if you could just talk a little bit about that process. I'm really interested to see where this is going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, actually, all the above. So I kind of want to go, so like, again, the research that I've conducted is mostly just based off of my experiences, but I want to kind of do, and I kind of wanted to get this into the dissertation, but I figured it was a larger project, so it's to go into these communities and kind of conduct interviews and jam sessions to kind of see and kind of get to know their perspectives of improvisation, because this can change also culturally as well. So the system that I built out may look completely different than if I were to build out a system for somebody else from a different area. And it just depends on the different elements that they're going to be attached to. In terms of, I guess, neuroscience, that would probably be like the next step after the experiential part of the project. But yeah, all of the above, technically. Yeah. Oh.
Thank you. When you talk about future steps, you talk about this idea of decolonization and Afrofuturism. As you and I have been to a lot of jazz concerts and they're not very diverse, I would be interested in thinking how you're thinking that will weave into the framework. Like, what does it look like for folks that were pioneers of the field and that are Black musicians to then be encoded in technology? And what does that do for music and the culture at large in terms of, getting youth excited about, improvisation and things like that? What does that look like for you, and what are some of those goals that you see yourself in?
Right, yeah, thank you. So I actually saw a Instagram live. It was called "What Is the New Black?" and it was I forget the musician's name. He was a musician out of Oregon, but he was interviewing Esperanza Spalding, and they were talking about this idea of departments, music departments, having jazz programs that are particularly having diversity problems. Like, there's not a lot of Black students in these different programs, and the issue is that jazz is a very communal and a very community-based music. And the fact that we don't see the community in these departments is a big issue. And then when we actually go back into these communities, especially with the youth, they don't understand the music in terms of their own heritage, in the sense of like, they know it, but it's like their grandfather's music, right? But if it was more connected to what they're doing in their communities, such as like activism of like, what is your neighbor down the street doing, with the music that's kind of similar to what, is happening there, then it would have more of a connection. But in terms of like, I guess, departmentally, the fact that we don't have faculty teaching communities that are from this music is a big problem. It's more almost like stealing from, technically academia stealing jazz, technically. So what I want to do with this project is to kind of bring that back and kind of say like, I want to include the community that is in these institutions that make the institutions so much money. So I want to be able to bring back and connect the communities and kind of bring back into their own heritages as well. But yeah, yeah. Oh, Mike, yeah.
Thanks again, Scott. Just curious, do you see these tools and the improvisational practices embedded within them as centering jazz primarily and only, sort of, or would you consider branching into other cultural disciplines of music practices, or like encoding different rules for different?
Yeah.
And would that just come out of working with musicians or not?
Yeah, that would come out with working with musicians. I guess for the immediate project, and I kind of try to stay away. I know I used the term throughout the talk of jazz and everything, but I kind of want to stay away from the term jazz, as it kind of simplifies the work being done by African Americans, I would say. So I would guess like, yeah, there would be different genres, since it's a diasporic kind of music that I'm trying to attack. So yeah, definitely.
Could encourage any more questions at this point, and if yeah. Great.
Oh.
Hi, Omar.
Hi.
Hey, Omar.
Hey, hi, Scott. Let me first start by congratulating you. There's a little bit of echo, but hopefully that's okay. I'd like to start by congratulating you for your amazing work throughout the years, your very thorough presentation, which leaves all the audience and future viewers of this recording, hopefully, with more interest to read more and get to know more about your work. And also about your future plans. It sounds really amazing. But I guess my question / suggestion would be to ask you to think and maybe talk a little bit about this idea of this moment that we're living in, especially this position that you now have, which is a a position of great power and responsibility, you know. This transition or integration more likely of quantum computing into our daily practice, it represents a unique moment in time, not just for you as a researcher, but for us all, as in being able to start over in a way. We are basically having an opportunity to be able to decide what is the future of computing, but also what is the future of integrating computers into our lives. And I'm really pleased to see your future plans, including more about this community. So I wanted to maybe ask, what is your idea of the implications of this, not only in terms of what opportunities will there be to look at things that we are using, like, for example, the interfaces. You showed a lot of circuits. Do you think that is that the model that we will be using for integrating in creating these new communities of the future, integrated communities? What aspects are you also passionate about addressing with this future work?
I would say, I guess, interacting with the communities, the actual weeds and the technical part. I do want to educate about this new technology to anybody who's willing to learn. But in terms of, I kind of want to use it as a way to bring and integrate the community back in. Not necessarily to educate them to say like, oh, now you need to build a whole bunch of quantum computing applications, but to use technology as a way of thinking how music is being, evolving over time in this current society. So there would be a little bit of, I guess, in the next project of the technical aspect of educating people, but mostly I kind of want them to be a co-researcher in discovering what does it mean to look through improvisation through a quantum mechanical lens or any kind of physics or natural world kind of a lens, and to kind of see what different directions we can take. But yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think we'll probably move to the next segment. I want to thank everybody, especially for the questions. And our committee will meet with Scott. We'll have some more questions, which is sort of, de rigueur. And again, congratulate you on, a fabulous presentation, but the whole process of discovery and the projection into the future that we've been able to kind of ride along on today was fabulous, be memorable.
Hey, thank you so much.
So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Scott. Recording has stopped.